Welcome to Have You Read It? The channel where we bring books to life, one summary at a time. In today's episode, we're diving into Bad Therapy: Why the Kids Aren't Growing Up by Abigail Shrier. This thought-provoking book explores the unintended consequences of the therapeutic approach to parenting and education that has swept through America. Shrier argues that the over-medicalization of childhood has led to a generation that is more anxious, fragile, and less equipped to deal with the challenges of life. Bad Therapy is a valuable read because it challenges conventional wisdom and encourages a more critical examination of the mental health industry's impact on our children. Shrier offers a controversial perspective, suggesting that the very interventions intended to help our kids may be doing more harm than good. Abigail Shrier's Bad Therapy examines how the mental health industry's interventions in children's lives have backfired, leading to a generation that is more anxious and less prepared for adulthood. The book questions the over-reliance on therapy and diagnoses, suggesting that these interventions can often do more harm than good. Shrier traces the shift towards a therapeutic approach in parenting and education, noting that psychologists were once the last people parents would consult on raising kids. However, as the author's generation became parents, they sought psychological awareness and looked to wellness experts for guidance. This led to a focus on children's happiness, monitoring their moods, and anticipating their distress. Schools also adopted a therapeutic approach, with expanded mental health staffs and a focus on trauma-informed education. This shift aimed to cultivate happy, well-adjusted kids, but instead, it has raised the loneliest, most anxious, and fearful generation on record. The book introduces the concept of iatrogenesis, where a healer harms a patient in the course of treatment. Shrier argues that therapy is not a benign folk remedy and can lead to unintended harm in up to 20% of patients. It can encourage family estrangement, compromise resilience, and undermine self-efficacy. Citing studies, the book highlights how psychological debriefing for disaster victims can worsen PTSD symptoms, and counseling for normal bereavement can hinder recovery from loss. The book highlights the paradox that as treatments for anxiety and depression have become more sophisticated and readily available, adolescent anxiety and depression have ballooned. Shrier cites a study titled "More Treatment but No Less Depression: The Treatment Prevalence Paradox," noting that increased treatment availability has not reduced the incidence of major depressive disorder in Western countries. This suggests that many treatments and helpers aren't actually helping. The sources consider the impact of smartphones, COVID-19 lockdowns, and climate change on youth mental health. Smartphones and social media are identified as potential causes of poor adolescent mental health, with evidence linking them to increased depression, anxiety, and self-harm. The book also discusses the role of climate anxiety and suggests that therapists may be validating and reinforcing children's fears about human extinction via climate change. Shrier outlines several ways in which therapy can be harmful: teaching kids to pay close attention to their feelings, directing kids in routinized habits of monitoring and sharing their bad feelings. One source argues that focusing on emotions can increase emotional distress, and that feelings are responsive to cues and often off. Inducing rumination, or brooding on past injuries and personal problems, is identified as a significant iatrogenic risk of therapy. One source shares that therapists should be doing worry and rumination discontinuing interventions. Making happiness a goal, insisting that happiness be their goal, we place kids in a crucible. On the one hand, chasing positivity tends to make them more depressed. Then feeling depressed gets socially rewarded. Affirming and accommodating kids' worries, therapists and parents often reinforce a child's outsized fears by solidifying a child's worry through affirmation and accommodation. Monitoring, constant monitoring at home and school has infested childhood with stress. The book argues that adding monitoring to a child's life is functionally equivalent to adding anxiety. Dispensing diagnoses liberally, even mental health professionals are more likely to interpret ordinary patient behavior as pathological if they are briefed on the patient's diagnosis. It demoralizes them. Drug M. Altering your child's brain chemistry is about as profound a decision as you'll ever make as a parent. But for many child psychiatrists and far too many pediatricians, it involves little more than a pro forma signature and tearing off a sheet gum to a prescription pad. Encourage kids to share their trauma, demanding that they locate any dark feelings and share them. The best of doctors say it's better to not have people talk about things. Acknowledge that some people will just need to go off and be on their own, but also that some need support, and that it's hard to know what people need and what's going to be helpful. Encourage young adults to break contact with toxic family. Therapists have made endless mischief from this baseless and unfalsifiable assertion that all unhappiness in adults is traceable to childhood trauma. Family estrangement is a major iatrogenic risk of therapy. Create treatment dependency. A patient inducted into the habit of consulting with a therapist may become convinced she cannot ever act without the express approval of an authority figure. The book broadens its scope to include the role of schools in promoting bad therapy. With the shift to social-emotional learning cell, teachers, counselors, and school psychologists have been playing shrink, introducing the iatrogenic risks of therapy to school kids. The new education plan often includes emotions check-ins. Teachers start each day by directing students to do a feeling circle and reflect on their feelings. Full psychology staff. Thanks to Obama era and a series of new initiatives, schools employ a school psychologist, team of school counselors, and handful of social workers. Social-emotional learning cell, a curricular juggernaut that devours billions in education, spending each year an upward of 8% of teacher time. Many teachers say they try to ensure that social-emotional learning happens all day long. Shadows. To follow kids with problems ranging from mild learning disabilities to violent tendencies. Artificial intelligence. Big tech is creating apps that will soon have the capacity to provide therapy to every single child. Ultimately, Shrier urges a return to common sense and a more balanced approach to raising children. By challenging the therapeutic order, Shrier hopes to empower families to raise a generation that is resilient, self-reliant, and truly well-adjusted. Here are some of the most important lessons from the book. Iatrogenosis in therapy. Therapy, like any intervention, can cause harm. It's not a benign remedy and carries risks, especially for children whose sense of self is still developing. The sources mention that therapy can lead individuals to see themselves as sick, and can even cause family estrangement. The treatment prevalence paradox. Despite increased access to mental health treatment, adolescent anxiety and depression have ballooned. This suggests that more treatment doesn't necessarily lead to less mental illness. The authors of More Treatment, but No Less Depression. The treatment prevalence paradox noted that increased treatment availability hasn't reduced the incidence of major depressive disorder in Western countries. Feelings aren't always facts. The book emphasizes that emotions are unstable and manipulable. Encouraging children to constantly track and validate their feelings can lead to increased emotional distress. One source suggests that a healthy emotional life involves a certain amount of daily repression, which may be needed to get through school. Bad therapy practices. Bad therapy includes practices such as inducing rumination, making happiness a goal, affirming and accommodating anxieties, monitoring kids excessively, dispensing diagnoses liberally, and encouraging family estrangement. The author argues that these practices can lead to a tyranny of feelings and undermine resilience. The importance of resistance. The book is a call to action to resist the therapeutic order that has taken over parenting and education. It suggests that parents, schools, and pediatricians have been too willing to accept the self-assurance of experts, and it's time to offer a little resistance. In conclusion, bad therapy serves as a wake-up call, urging parents, educators, and mental health professionals to reconsider the current approach to youth mental health. Shrier challenges the over-reliance on therapy and medication. advocating for a more balanced and nuanced understanding of childhood and adolescence. By encouraging resistance against the therapeutic order, Shrier hopes to empower families to raise a generation that is resilient, self-reliant, and truly well-adjusted. The author encourages listeners to explore the book further. Thanks for watching. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button so you never miss our next book dive.